And this is the initial trauma bond for the kids too. Like they're trying to attach to their caregivers because every kid will try at the very least to attach. But when it's a character disordered person like this, it's not going to be a healthy attachment. And then they're 1,000 times more likely, it seems like, to get into a romantic relationship with someone in adulthood if that was their upbringing. So, what do you do to try to get people to unravel that, to untangle that?
The trauma, yeah. So I think one of the things that I particularly work with the parents I work with is that, we always learned, like in divorce situations, you never put a child in the middle. And that's actually not correct. We don't put them in the middle. We actually have to prioritize them getting clarity. And what that means is that we don't ever have to say anything bad about the other parent, but we do have to call out behaviors. We spend a lifetime in relationships, or months, weeks, months, years, or whatever it is, in relationships where we gaslight ourselves into thinking they're okay, right? That they're not unhealthy. And we do this to our children, where we kind of act sometimes as if everything's fine. We don't want them to see the argument. We create, and I actually don't call it gaslighting, because gaslighting has malice intent, like a malicious intent. I call it intuition disintegration.
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, yeah. So it's this idea that we disintegrate our children's intuition when we minimize bad experiences that they're having. When we say, oh, or that our child doesn't want to go sit on Uncle John's lap. And we say, oh, go sit on Uncle John's lap. He loves you. He loves you so much. What have we just done to our child? We've disintegrated their intuition. We've made them not listen to their body. Their body is telling them something doesn't feel right. And we're forcing them to do something that doesn't feel right. And we do the same thing in a family system when there's abusers. We kind of like pretend they're not as bad. Or when you have an alcoholic in the family, you're like, oh, well, no, dad didn't drink too much tonight, or mom didn't drink too much tonight. We minimize it so that they don't feel pain. But the problem is that then they don't have any intuition to tell them when something isn't right.
That's a
And that
huge one.
and that fortifies the trauma bond, doesn't it? When you literally have no ability, you disassociate from the bad, you become trauma bonded, and your intuition you totally ignore. You disintegrate, you literally disintegrate from your intuition.
I
And
love
so,
that.
yeah, I find it extremely helpful for protective parents to understand that now what I want you to do is, you don't have to say anything bad about, dad or mom, but what you can do is say, hmm, there was a lot of yelling yesterday, and that really is inappropriate when someone calls someone else a bad name. Bad name calling is not appropriate. Now, I didn't say your dad is a horrible person for calling me bad names. I didn't say anything disparaging about the person. I called out the behavior. And that is what helps give children clarity. How do we expect a child at 5, 8, 10, and 12 witnessing abuse going on? It's more than witnessing. What we know from the research is they're truly experiencing in their body. They are having those exact experiences. Yet when we divorce or separate from that person, we expect them to understand that that person may not be safe. But we've hidden all along. We've tried to we've disintegrated their intuition. We haven't allowed them to feel it in the home.
Right.
That's a problem.
Right.
It's
And
sad. It's sad. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying, like, who wants their kid to feel pain? I didn't want my kids to feel pain, but we have to actually help them to see what behaviors are healthy and what behaviors are unhealthy.
I think what you said is exactly what happens. They lose touch with what they're really thinking and feeling. They lose touch with their authentic selves because they were either suppressing it, or they outright lose touch with it completely, because what will happen is they'll speak up, but then they'll be shut down. They'll speak up and then they'll be criticized, guilted, etc. And they'll learn, oh, This is what happens if I speak up. This is what happens if I keep it real about what I'm thinking and feeling. I get punished.
Absolutely. So better to be quiet, better to disassociate, better to try to get along with everybody, even if they're a harmful person. And then what happens is, right, then they go into adulthood and they end up in relationships with people who are abusive, or maybe as a result of that experience in their childhood, now they try to control others more. They are they are exerting power and control over people because they felt so out of control in their childhood. They
Right.
had they felt like so lost, right? Yeah. No,
Absolutely.
mm.
And so, what would you say to someone on the outside looking in? What are some of the behaviors to look for in kids if they're growing up in this kind of dynamic?
So one of the things we know is that oftentimes ADD and ADHD is actually a manifestation of trauma.
Mm,
And so if you take a classroom of about 30 kids, you're going to have, 5 kids in that classroom who are suffering some form of abuse in their home, right? Actually, the stats are very high for child sexual abuse out of a class of 30, but certainly all of the abuses are coercion and control. It's grooming someone, pulling someone in, luring them into a relationship, making someone believe they have to rely on you. And this is what abusers do in family systems, right?
sure.
So a child who's not really able to focus, a child who's hyper focused on something, a child who has lots of anxiety, panic attacks, dysregulation, they're constantly having challenges in relationship dynamics, having challenges with friends, maybe, um, certainly self harm. These are some of the manifestations, right?
Sure.
And depression. So, depression, anger is depression turned outward. That's all it is. It's like my fear, my sadness is all going to just come out, and I'm going to be angry, right? And then when children are feeling that fear, they pull it in, they may demonstrate more depression, right?
Right.
And so those are things to look for. The issue becomes, how does a child actually share what's going on when they can't actually name it, right?
Right. It's so difficult because they don't know. And even adults don't know a lot of times. So, if someone's seeing this from the outside, do you recommend they do anything, say anything? Is there a proper way to go about it?
Well, one of the things I think that these children need, that's vital, is they need their safe parent to really be working on attachment, connecting to the child, really, really fortifying a connection and attachment to the child. Because when you're living in a space of dysregulation, you never know if you're safe. Attachment is really, really hard to fortify.
Right.
So for me, anybody who's listening, who they are living in this experience, and there's no judgment for people who stay because sometimes it's really hard to escape it, right? But if you're living in it, know that the one thing you can do is fortify your child's attachment with you, like work on that, like intentionally, like understand that abusers are constantly trying to make the child feel dysregulated, unable to attach, inability to be authentic. And so you've got to work. I say protective parents work double time, like on that. They have to work like so hard on that. Um, so I would also say that if you're an outsider and you know that something's going on, and here's the thing, if there's no physical violence, can you really get child welfare involved? I mean, what are they going to do? Right? These are the nuanced abuses that are not recognized in any of our systems. They're not recognized as abuse in our schools when the children come and maybe report that they're afraid to go home because not because dad will or mom will hit them, but because they're just afraid to go home, right? And so they can't name it. The child can't name it. The school can't name it. This is not abuse the pediatricians will be referring. This is not abuse the child welfare will investigate. This is not abuse family court acknowledges at all. And so what that child needs more than anything is a connection.
Oh,
So if you
absolutely.
so if you see this and you know this child, if you're a grandparent, can you like spend extra time. If you're an uncle, if you're, if you're, the coach on the team and you just make a little extra, you just give that child just a little extra attention, just connect, because that will help them to regulate more. Yeah. Sorry, my Kit Kat crying.
Oh, that's cute. But
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, making sure the honest lines of communication are still there. Because as long as they're still there, there's a shot. Like, okay, maybe they're going to be honest with you about what's going on, and then you'll be able to help them more. But when they shut down and they don't talk, and then you don't know what's going on, then it gets really tricky.
I think you're right. Yeah. I also think like no child wants to like, a child doesn't want to be pulled away from their parent.
Right.
They love their parent even if their parent doesn't love them. And that would be something important to highlight, I think. Is a lot of people think that just because someone's your parent, they love you. And that's not true. Abusers do not know how to actually love, like in a way that is healthy. They love, as you started off the call with, they love with conditions,
Right.
right? And children know that. So I think helping parents who are safe and protective understand that disengaging from that person, if you can, is okay because they're not healthy. And in teaching our children that they don't have to stay around people who are unhealthy, that as young adults they can make choices to be around people who are good for them versus harmful for them. But if we don't start that conversation very young, then it's going to be more challenging.
Absolutely. And what are your suggestions for a protective parent when the abusive parent is weaponizing the children against them, trying to punish them or trying to triangulate the kids with the protective parent? What
Yeah.
are your suggestions for a situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, these are such challenging situations because, man, I mean, so in my situation, my children recall the day that my ex started indoctrinating them. I had caught him having an affair, and I left with the kids like for the weekend to my parents, and then came back because supposedly we were going to get therapy and get better or whatever. And when I
Hmm.
left to go to work that night, is when he started telling them I had cheated, that I hadn't been taking my medication, that I was unstable and I could not be trusted. They were 9 and 10. I didn't separate from him until they were 17 and 19, and it wasn't until my daughter was 17 that she told me. He did that for all those years. So what I would say to anybody listening, if you're with an abuser, know that they've been doing this since day one. They've just maybe been hiding it, but
Hmm.
they have been weaponizing your child in some way against you, slowly eroding away the connection you have with your child. Because if they can do that, they have a better ability to exert power and control over you and over the child.